Here's a story from Grandpa for my three favorite little girls, Emma, Ayla, and Audrey. Last time I read a folk tale about a mythical guy named Paul Bunyan. Today's story is another folk tale about a pioneer woman named Calamity Jane. Calamity Jane was actually a real person who was born with the name Martha Jane Cannery. The stories that people told each other about her, though, have very probably been exaggerated in the retelling, just as they were with Paul Bunyan. In this story, she is probably faster and smarter and braver than anybody could possibly be, but like most tall tales, it makes a good story that's fun to listen to. So here's the story of Calamity Jane. Adapted by Stephen Krensky. Illustrations by Lisa Carlson. Martha Jane Cannery always knew she was special. Other girls might spend their time playing with corn silk dolls or sweeping up a dirt floor. Martha Jane was different. She learned to ride and shoot, and she wore clothes that wouldn't get in her way. She might not be in the middle of every calamity just yet, but she was drawn to adventure like ants to a picnic. One time, when Martha Jane was playing in the Missouri woods, she came upon a rattlesnake sunning itself on a rock. Rattle went the rattlesnake, trying to scare her. Martha Jane just laughed. "I'm 9 years old," she said, "and that's the most pitiful rattle I ever did hear." Then she opened her mouth and let out a rattle that was heard in 3 counties. The snake was so surprised it died of embarrassment right there on the spot. When Martha Jane was 12, her family set out with other pioneers to move from Missouri to Montana. They were hoping for a better life out west. It was a rugged 5-month trip by wagon train. The trails were pretty rough. Some of the ruts were so deep that the wagon bottoms scraped the ground as they passed by. Whenever the wagon train came to a river, the leader always found a shallow place to cross. But that didn't satisfy Martha Jane. She looked for deeper spots to cross over on her pony. One time, though, she got stuck in some quicksand that tried to pull her under. But Martha Jane kicked so hard the quicksand heated up and turned to glass. Then she stepped out with no trouble at all. Every day the men in the wagon train went hunting. Martha Jane wanted to go too, but the men didn't want to bring her along, so she went hunting by herself. When she returned, she had 3 rabbits slung over her shoulder. "That's pretty good for a little squirt," said one of the men. "Oh, I've got 4 dead deer about a mile back," Martha Jane explained. "I just couldn't carry everything at once." After that, the hunters were glad for her company. By the time the wagon train reached Montana, she was shooting so much game that the pioneers had to eat 5 meals a day just to keep up. Horsing around. Virginia City, Montana was a gold mining town. That suited Martha Jane just fine. She poked her nose into every nook and cranny. "You're looking for trouble," some folks warned her. "Course I am," she always replied. "It saves time." Miners came and went every day, looking for new veins of gold to make their fortune. They were a mean bunch, for sure. Most of them ended up with either holes in their heads or holes in their pockets. But a few got lucky and struck it big. With the shout of "Gold" was heard, the news traveled faster than lightning. One miner found a nugget the size of his fist. Another discovered a vein of ore so rich he wore out 3 shovels digging it up. Martha Jane didn't pan much for gold herself. It was dull work, she thought. Instead, she liked to stay on the move. She had a special fondness for horses, especially fast ones, and she had a knack for handling them. One time, some cowboys brought wild horses to town. One was a black stallion with fire in its eyes. It had already thrown 4 cowboys when Martha Jane came along. "You be careful now," they warned her. "I'll take my chances," she said. "I'm as stubborn as 3 mules, and my kick is worse." She came up to the horse slowly. "I know you're just showing off," she said softly. "Everyone can see how big and strong you are." The horse snorted. "I'm just a little thing, though," Martha Jane went on, "and throwing me won't mean much. But if you let me ride you, you'll make those rough and tough cowboys feel even worse." Well, nobody could ever be sure whether her horse really understood, but Martha Jane was the only one who ever rode him proper. That horse came in pretty handy, too. One day Martha Jane was out riding when she came across an army patrol fighting for their lives. Martha Jane didn't wait for a moment. She swooped in, pulled the captain up on her horse, and rode away with him to safety. When he recovered, he took to calling her Calamity Jane, and the name stuck like honey on a bear's tongue. Living in Deadwood. When Calamity Jane was all grown up, she moved to Deadwood, South Dakota. This mining town was friendlier than its name, though not by much. There she met all kinds of cowboys and gunfighters, and a few upright folk mixed in. The most famous was Wild Bill Hickok. He was tougher than new leather and didn't smile but once or twice a year. Wild Bill had been an Army scout and town marshal, but he was retired from those jobs at present. As a young man, Bill had once gone 8 months without changing his clothes. Then one night, while Bill was sleeping, a bear smelled him and his clothes a mile away. It followed the scent right up to Bill and took a bite out of his leg. Bill woke up directly, and before that bear made a meal out of him, Bill started wrestling. The bear had his claws, but Bill had a knife. Over and over they tumbled. When the dust finally settled, Bill had himself a new fur coat. Anybody who could handle a bear like that was Calamity Jane's kind of person. So Bill and Calamity became friends and traded tales of their famous deeds. For a real adventure, said Wild Bill, she should ride the Pony Express. The Pony Express was a string of riders who carried the mail across the frontier. So Calamity took the job. Her route was 50 miles back and forth through the Black Hills. It was rough country, and not just because of the rocks and ravines. Outlaws often waited on the trail. They robbed the riders of money or packages that they were carrying. On her third day, Calamity Jane found 3 outlaws waiting for her in a narrow pass. "Throw down your bags," one of them told her. "Can't do that," she answered. "I might get a tongue lashing." "You could get a lot worse than that," said another, flashing his gun. Before he could even think of shooting, Calamity Jane had already fired. Her first bullet hit the outlaw's gun dead on, going straight up the barrel and jamming the chamber. Her next bullet cut the reins on the second outlaw's horse. The horse reared up, throwing its rider to the ground. "Maybe we'll let you go this once," said the third outlaw, backing away. "Are you sure?" said Calamity. "Seems like this party is just getting started." But the outlaws didn't answer. They skedaddled out of there so fast even their dust was left behind. So Calamity kept on riding, and nobody bothered her after that. Changing times. Most people thought Calamity Jane was tougher than old beef jerky. She walked barefoot through the snow, they said, and she could look into the sun without blinking. But Calamity had a softer side, too. She just didn't advertise it much. One time, the whole town of Deadwood came down with the smallpox. There was so much itching and scratching it sounded like an army of grasshoppers marching through. The doctor got sick. The sheriff felt poorly. Even the undertaker hoped nobody would die. He just wasn't up to burying them. Almost everybody took to their beds, but not Calamity Jane. No one knew why she didn't get sick. Some folks said her skin was too thick for the smallpox to get in. Others figured that even smallpox wouldn't dare to tangle with her blood and guts. Whatever the reason, Calamity Jane was the one healthy person who wasn't afraid to tend to the sick folks, so she set to nursing them. It took a few months for the smallpox to run its course. Calamity didn't get much sleep. In one stretch, she was up for 3 days straight. "I had to use broom handles to prop my eyes open," she said, "and some didn't last more than an hour before they snapped in two." When the folks finally recovered, they wanted to thank her, of course, but she could only put up with so much of that. As determined as Calamity Jane was, there was one thing she couldn't stop. That was progress. Deadwood was growing up. Storekeepers were building wooden sidewalks so people didn't have to walk through the mud. The Pony Express was gone. There were no more stagecoaches to rescue. In their place was that belching monster called the railroad. People were even talking about putting bathrooms indoors, but Calamity knew that was a load of foolishness. Still, there was no denying the town had changed. Now, Calamity wasn't about to get misty over these things, but she wasn't ready for a rocking chair just yet. So when she found herself sitting still long enough to see a spider spin a web, she knew it was time to move on. The whole town turned out to see her off. "We'll miss you," said the mayor. "If we find any trouble, we'll send for you straight away." "Fair enough," said Calamity Jane. "I've always liked trouble." Then she rode off into the sunset. And that's the end of the story. Why was she nicknamed Calamity Jane? Well, calamity is another word for disaster. So I guess people figured that if a calamity was happening, the person you would most want to have there to help you out was Martha Jane Cannery. In fact, she said the first person who called her Calamity Jane was a man whose life she had just saved. Calamity Jane was still around when people started telling tall tales about her, and she enjoyed hearing the stories. She even wrote a book about her adventures, which may or may not have actually happened. True or not, tall tales are always fun, and I hope you enjoyed this one. Always remember that Grandpa loves you. I'm not exaggerating, and I hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.